Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast.
If you're going to be a person that goes and talks about death, it just automatically makes other people uncomfortable, just the topics. We have to share our comfort, like that comfort energy with other people so that they feel like they can be that vulnerable space and like dig into things that they may not even realize about themselves, right? Like things that fears, thoughts, ideas, connections they may have made that they don't even realize. So we got to give that space to them. You don't need a certain educational level for that. You don't need letters behind your name. You need bravery, courage, and that energy of willingness, right? So and openness, so people can come in and be in that space. But yeah, there's no degree for this. Now there's experiences that give you a little more street cred or whatever. But the willingness is, I think, the biggest piece that people have to have.
I really like what you said about like sharing our comfort levels. So like making sure that we're in a place where we're open and courageous, and that then diffuses into the environment and gives people a different way of interacting with this. I suppose a lot of people are hesitant. This was like one of the first things that I want to ask you is, what are the barriers to people having these conversations? And I suppose for me, one of the worries is twofold. One is that people might ask me a question that I don't know the answer to. So that's part of it. But also I want to be sure that I'm not causing harm, especially for people who have navigated or are navigating something that is so tender and so fraught with fear and sadness, that if they're in the midst of it, I don't want to say something that would be hurtful, because I've been on the receiving end of people saying things that are supposed to be comforting and actually like they're kind of terrible to hear. So I'd be really curious to hear from you both what your experience has been with why people don't have these conversations more.
I said something to somebody and she called me out on it, and I was like, "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't think of it in through your lens." And we had a quick little dialogue about it, and then we were okay. I just owned it, and I'm not going to do that again. So, we and the more you are in this space and you watch TED Talks of people talking about this stuff, or you listen to podcasts or whatever mediums, you learn what can be triggering for somebody else. Also, what feels comfortable for you to say, because you're not going to say something that's just a canned response to somebody, because that's what everybody says. That's what we're trying to avoid, right? And so you have to figure out what feels authentic for you to say, but you have to do that by saying it and then gauging reaction and asking for grace if it doesn't land either like you intended, or you're like, oh, that I'm not going to say that again because that doesn't feel authentic just in my own body.
Yeah. I think the recognition that you're going to say stupid shit, right? Like, and that's just, you are, right? And that's why relationship, and like that energy that you give off, and then the willingness to be humble when people correct you, right? Like, instead of getting defensive, being like, whoa, that wasn't my intent. Because like, we're nurses, we have dark humor. One of the first things I'll say in a class or in anything is like, we have dark humor. There is never an intent to do harm or make you feel any sadness or that kind of stuff, in or like agitation, whatever, right? But call us out, like tell us, like, whoa, too dark, too deep. Like, we've seen some stuff. So like every once in a while, those things slip out, and you're like, oh, wrong crowd, and so you have to be able to adapt to the people you're with, but by creating that space for people, that really helps them. When you're talking about barriers, there's just so many, right? Like, there's just people that don't want to deal with their own mortality or the idea of dying, right? So you have that barrier. That's just I had that in my family, where like my dad, I was watching him decline, and I'm like, we probably need to have this conversation. I tried to talk about hospice with him. I tried to talk about all this stuff. there was no discussing it, right? Like he was like, nope, not doing it. When it's time, whatever. But like that was all I could get from him, versus like I can have a conversation with my 16-year-old kid about it, and it's a much more open conversation. But that's because they've been around me and they've had lots more conversations. So I think that's part of the stuff, is like you have to figure, you kind of tiptoe until you step on the barrier, right? And then you're like, okay, either, and then do you have the time, energy, or space to push through it, right? Like I say a lot of our job is planting seeds and seeing what grows, what nurtures, what questions start coming. But if we do a lot more listening to people and letting them speak, we'll find the path, right? And so that those are the challenges that come with it. But the barriers are many.
Well, and one thing we've talked about recently is that it's okay for it to be uncomfortable.
Yeah,
It's
discomfort is not the enemy.
it's not. No one ever died from being uncomfortable, right? So tiptoeing up to that line and then testing the water and see what your reaction is, and acknowledging this might be uncomfortable, but that's okay. From uncomfortable comes change. And so if you're really here to learn and grow, it there might be times when it's uncomfortable, and that's okay.
Right.
I like too this idea of, as we're kind of like groping around in the dark for where that boundary is or where that barrier is with the person, to become very in tuned with when it's like a hard barrier versus a porous barrier. So like there might be a point where it's like, oh, like they've reached the edge. Even for yourself, you reach the edge of where you're comfortable going in your anticipation of your own mortality, or someone that you love. You kind of find that barrier, but sometimes it might be a little bit squishy, where it's like, oh, I know this is actually just like the first of many conversations. And sometimes you might have a conversation where someone is like, no, like this and no further, like we're not going to continue to talk about this anymore. And I think that might be like a really difficult place to be too, when you're trying to navigate things with people that you really care about, or like if you are the person who is responsible for making some of those decisions for a loved one. That seems like that could be a real particular challenge, is when there's like a hard barrier and you can't navigate that with people past that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like when you're working with families, and you've got somebody that's like, nope, we're not talking about it. Like that shuts it down. But what I find most often, especially with patients, is that they will test you, right? They'll say something to you, and you have to be willing to sit in that space, right? Like, do you believe in God? What happens after we die? Or like those kinds of conversations. Or even I've had a patient just say, am I dying? Right. And you're just like, whoa, like I just wanted to give you some Tylenol, right? Like, so, you're like, I mean, but at that moment, you can't walk away from it, right? Like you can't, if we shut the window, they're never going to open it again. So it's a two-way street, right? Like I can kind of push, we can kind of like ask those questions, but we have to be willing when people open the door or the window, right? We have to be willing to step into it. Now, during that moment, during that time, it may not be, the time to have that conversation. You might be like, hey, I need to get a couple things situated. You said something really big, and we need to process that together. So let me get these other patients taken care of, or let me get these other, let me get dinner done, and then let's sit and have a coffee afterwards, or have a dessert, and let's talk about it, right? Like, so sometimes we have to give pause just because of life. But if we don't acknowledge it, we've shut the window, we've shut it, right? And they know you're not safe anymore to have those conversations. So you really, it's a two-way street, right? Like we want to kind of poke and kind of get the conversation going, because we've seen the benefit to it. We've seen how people are resilient, how people, once they have those conversations, like the weight is lifted, even if they're adolescents or 20-year-olds. So age is not an issue here. So, I mean, I've had to have end of life conversations with 8-year-olds. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where you've got to be willing when they open it, you got to be willing to step in, right? And they know who the people are safe. They're like what, teenagers, toddlers, whatever, that keep testing which parent to go to ask the right question, right? Like, I
Oh
mean,
gosh,
it's
yeah.
that same thing. So we just really want to make sure that we, like, when they say it, oh, I mean, you don't have to acknowledge it right then, right? You can acknowledge it, but you don't have to, like, we don't have to dive full into a theology conversation, right? We can be like, whoa, you said something really big. We need to come back to it, but maybe not while we're in the middle of church, or maybe, you know what I mean? Like, so
Mm.
depending where you are can depend on how far and how deep you can go into it.
Hmm. You the word that you just used a moment ago is the benefit of having these conversations. And so I would like to ask, what are the benefits to having these conversations? I mean, I would say like as soon as possible with your loved ones, but what are some of the things that you see in your experience or in your professional or personal experience that happens after we have these types of conversations? What are the benefits?
Oh my gosh, the list is enormous.
One, like, I can either go professional or personal. If I go on the personal side, like, I'm not married, I have adult children. Well, they're getting there. So, but one of them turned 19, and he, like, looked at me, and we had kind of some sort of conversation. And he's like, "Mom, I can't make these choices for you." And I looked at him and I said, "Peter, they're not yours to make. They're mine. I've given them to you, right? Like,
Hmm.
I've been very clear on my choices." And I watched him tall, just relax. Like, I could physically watch him relax. And he's like, "Oh." So to me, having the conversation, especially with your family, is a gift that you give them. So if they ever have to be asked, "Do you know your mom's wishes? Do you know what she wanted?" Um, they don't they can answer it, right? Like, they don't have to sit there in guilt. I think one of the challenges too is that people think that we're trying to take away grief, and we're not.
Mm.
Grief is the cost of love. We are not there to take away grief. We're there to help people not have shame, not have guilt, not have guessing, right? So, like, and we've seen that both professionally, right? In the hospital, you see it where families leave with grief. No matter what, they loved you, right? They're going to leave with grief. We're not taking that away. But the difference of people walking away with a family divided, with a family because
Mm.
one person thought mom wanted this, one person thought mom wanted that. Like, these siblings will probably never talk to each other because they have very different um, messaging in their head of what happened. And now we've got family dynamics getting pulled apart. We've got guilt and shame. And we often say, once the tubes go in, the guessing begins. So,
Mm.
having these conversations before we get to those spaces around a dinner table with, water, whiskey, or wine, way better, way more comfortable than at 2 in the morning in an ICU filled with beeps and noises and rushing people and all of that kind of stuff. Way better to have it in the comfort of your home, church, whatever. Like, those are spaces and places to have it.
Amy, what are some of the things that you see with people on the other side? Erin already mentioned the palpability of the relaxing for her son to realize that he didn't have to be the one to make those decisions. But what are some of the things that you're seeing on the back end of having some of these conversations with people?
I see empowerment. I see a comfort now with making an educated decision for myself of, oh, I didn't realize that's what that was. And so now I know what it is. And now I definitely want that, or I definitely don't want that. And remembering the lens that we're looking through is always, if I do this, will I still get to do the things that I love to
Mm.
do? And framing it that way, just kind of repeatedly, people are like, oh yeah, if I am in this situation, I don't want whatever this medical intervention is, because I'm not ever going to not have that, right? So
Mm.
just as an example, like, I love to eat food, and so a feeding tube is a no-go for me. Absolutely not. I'm making an educated decision. I know what the side effects are. I know the short term, the long term. I know that I am taking a calculated risk if I might get aspiration pneumonia if I chew and
Mm.
swallow when I'm not maybe supposed to, according to speech therapy. But I'm deciding for myself because I love to eat food, and if I'm in a position to not get to do that anymore, that brings me joy. So no, I don't want to have a feeding tube unless it's temporary. I might be able to live with it if it's temporary. So that empowerment of knowing what all of these weird medical things are and deciding for myself what I'm willing to tolerate, and then sharing that with whoever my designated person is, because then I know that they know what's
Mm.
important to me and that they won't do something that I don't want them, that I'm not willing to live with. Because I also don't want them to have that guilt, that second guessing that Erin talked about already. Um, no, I'm giving them that gift. You don't have to guess. This is my choice, and that just feels empowering to people. So
Mm.
that's what I see, is that relief. That I just think knowledge is power. So when you know what the things are and you can have the words to share those with your loved ones, then it's a relief. It feels really good and it's empowering.
That's a really helpful thing that you just said, is that when we know how to frame our wishes and how to talk about them, and this I think is one of the barriers too for people to having these conversations, is there's a lack of education around what things mean. So, in a medical system, in a medical setting, there's a lot of verbiage, there's a lot of vernacular that's specific to that field. And so we say things off the cuff like hospice, palliative care, life support, but people don't actually know what these things mean. And so having the conversation more from like a quality of life standpoint, where you can say, these are the things that are important to me, this is what helps me feel connected to other people, and then having it translated into the medical speak, I think is a really important role. And how, I guess I'm curious about, like, how do people who are like, well, I don't know what all the options are, so how can I possibly make these decisions? I don't know what these things mean. So how do you suggest that people kind of learn some of this, or who can they have help them? Like, what does this look like when people are wanting to talk about what a good life looks like for them?
Well, don't watch medical shows thinking you're going to learn all of the things.
Grey's Anatomy told me that.
Right.
Right. Oh
Yeah,
Lord
right.
Jesus.
There are a couple that are really good, but it can be traumatizing for people if they watch them without a translator to
Right.
help them. Because, like, just as you're saying, that's a whole different language. I mean, that's why we
Mhm.
have a whole class dedicated to medical terminology, is because it's a whole new
Mhm.
language.
Mhm.
And so if you can find people, if you're not able to come to one of our workshops, which I obviously highly encourage anyone and everyone to do, but if you don't have that option right now and we're not big enough to come to you, find someone who's in the medical field, someone who is a nurse who can help you, and watch a TV show or have that conversation, or start taking notes about the different medical things that you hear in a TV show, and say, I don't know what this is. Can you explain it to me in Sesame Street version where I'm going to understand, and talk to me about not maybe just what you would do or what you wouldn't do, but like give me just some facts, some side effects, some long term, like what does this look like long term, so that I can decide. And Google is not going to be your friend very
No.
much on this,
Mm.
very, because you can just go down so many rabbit holes. And for as good as it is, when you can do some research, you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to know what is a good source. So I just don't recommend that.
Well, and
I
like healthcare, just something like thinking about, like you talk about the language and stuff. Um, Things get really easily misinterpreted, right? Because like heartbeat, right? Like
mm.
everybody thinks they know what a heartbeat is, right? Well, a heartbeat is the valves closing in your heart. Like when we shock someone, when we do electrical shock, like that's an electrical conduction that we're doing. It's not a heartbeat. It's not a starting the heart. Like it's a reboot of the electrical system in the heart, right? That's going through the cardiac tissue. And so people have a really hard time. Like, well, let's use an example from like Grey's Anatomy. When they get that nice flat line right on the screen, gives them great drama, get that nice boop right through there, they'll be like, we need to shock him. You actually can't shock that. That is a non-shockable rhythm because there is no rhythm. So like when we shock people, they actually still have to have electrical conduction, right? So we have to reorganize that and reboot it, right? It's like kind of turning your phone on and off again, right? To get it to work again. It's not that your phone doesn't work. It's that it's not plugging in your phone to recharge it. And so like I think some of these medical terms get really, really easily manipulated. And like we've got to understand what we're actually talking about when we're looking at things, right? So that's the big challenge too, is like you want to do the Sesame Street version, but with enough resources and backing. Like you want Sesame Street version with a medical person, but not Sesame Street version with Grey's Anatomy, right? Like, definitions. So really that's probably the biggest challenge, is debunking all the things that people think or perceive, right? And then helping them find the path forward, right? And then asking the questions. That's one of the things I love when we do the classes. Is we'll get like, well, they said my aunt did this, and they said this. And I'm like, whoa, let's pull this back. Let's walk back through it and understand it. So that's one of the fun thing with doing like the classes, is people will bring their personal lived experiences, and then we get to help them kind of reframe them to understand why and what people were actually doing. So not giving medical advice, but just kind of reframing what they've seen and how they interpreted it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely the death and dying and life-saving interventions on shows can romanticize for sure some of these procedures. And like I think specifically about something like CPR. People don't realize that depending on how old you are, CPR can have a very, very different impact on your ability to recover from such a really difficult medical intervention. I will say a recommendation for people is, I know there's a lot of fear and like about AI, but I will say that using something like ChatGPT, or my personal favorite, which is Claude, because it tells you where it's getting its information from, but you can use AI to ask some of these questions, and you can say like, hey, ChatGPT, what does hospice mean? And can you give me an example? Or what does CPR mean? And can you give me an example for, a 40-year-old woman? And you'll get some better results than if you're just Googling something. So this is like, I wouldn't say this is by any stretch of the imagination, a replacement for having a conversation with a real person who knows what they're talking about, but it can help with some of those like bigger questions, specifically around terminology and how that affects people. I wanted to ask too, like, how much can your decisions change? So like, Amy, you already mentioned that like feeding tube, no way. And I think some people are hesitant to say things like that because they think, well, if I say it, then I'm locked into it. So how much can people change their minds about what their plans are?
You can change your mind all the time. You should. You should change your mind. What the answers I have today, I'm going to have different answers in 10 or 20 years. And I should, because my body is changing. I could even, if I get a new diagnosis, I might have to change how I am looking at my decisions. Because if I get a diagnosis of cancer today that is stage 4, and depending on where in my body it is, I might change my mind about some of my wishes, and they should. So these conversations shouldn't just be a one and done. This is an ongoing thing. But even if you don't, if you can remember to always look through the lens of what brings me joy.
Mm.
Now, those things might change too. They probably will change, right? The things that I love to do today, I might not be enjoying in the same way when I'm, 80. Now, Erin might still be rock climbing when she's 80. That brings her joy. But if we can always look through that lens, then we're going to be able to answer whatever options are given to us. Because if whether it's a short-term solution or a long-term solution, if you look through that lens, you're going to be able to answer that question.
Well, and I think also just spilling off of that, like, right, Amy said that I like to go rock climbing. I absolutely do. I live in Nebraska. I don't get to do it very often. But looking at that, I love adventure, right? Like, I love being
Mm.
outside. So what does that rock climbing all entail? It entails being outside, being adventurous, going on, exploring new things, right? So even kind of keeping that joy piece of like, what are the bigger pieces? So it's like, if I love to garden and I love to be outside and around the flowers and the plants and hands in the dirt, um, and you tell me that I am going to be have no white count and can't be around any of that stuff, like, is that truly
Mm.
bringing me joy? It's one of the places that we'll start when we do talk with patients and families, where they're like, well, last time I saw mom, she was in the garden, and it's like, she hasn't been in the garden for 5 years, right? Like, because she couldn't, she got too weak, or she whatever, right? So I think that's sometimes the spaces that we have to start with when we do have to take people down that path, is like, what did they love to do, right? And if they love to do this and they haven't done that for years, then what are we talking about? And so that's just a really big piece of it, is like,
And that comes back to quality.
yeah, it's all about quality. But if you ask people, well, like, what gives you quality, that sounds so boring. I have a question, right? So like, one fun one is, what's on your bucket list, right?
Mm.
That's a fun way to get people starting to talk about, because it's kind of keeping that mortality kind of in the background, right? But it's still like, what's on the bucket list? So what do I want to do before I can't, right? And the one group that we did that was so fun, usually a lot of people will say travel and all that kind of stuff. We did one group, they all had like home projects that they wanted to
Hmm.
finish, which was so fat, or quilts, or like that kind of, like, they were thinking more about their legacy. And it was the first class that had really said like those legacy kind of things, like, I want to be able to put together a photo family album. And it's like,
Hmm.
what's stopping you, do it
Yeah.
now, right? Like, so but yeah, like, I think that really helps people get started in some of the conversation, especially if you have somebody who's very, very resistant. Bucket list brings it a little more fun.
Hmm. It's I like the reframing of, instead of uh asking like, what things do you not want to be in place as you're approaching your end of life, it's really about what things bring you joy, and that there's more of a focus, like you said, on the quality of life versus the longevity of life. Because I think many people, especially when they're in an emergency kind of situation or something that's acute, is they start to think about, how can I prolong my life? And that's not always the best question to ask. Like, it seems like it's rarely the best question to ask. The better question is, what do you want those years to look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
And we don't, like, in healthcare, like, we have made death the enemy.
Hmm.
We've spent decades making death the enemy. And so we're not necessarily the best people to ask. End of life education is really limited in most healthcare arenas, which is why we also do like end of life education and how to start the conversation and that kind of stuff with our death essentials. Is because we've noticed that. Like, that was my master's research, was on effectiveness of end of life education in nursing. And then I
Hmm.
started going down different rabbit holes and looking at like what medical schools are doing to teach death, right? We've made death failure in healthcare. So it really has become very at odds with things like living a good life, living a quality life, living the life that you want is very, very empowering. And being able to go to your physician or your medical home and say, these are the things that give me quality, these are the things that I love, these are, when I can't do these things, we need to start having different conversations. I mean, I even remember with my grandma. My grandma was like 85. Like we were in the hospital. She had a GI bleed, whatever. And I was outside. Don't think I wasn't even a nurse yet, but I was like
Mm.
outside the room, and the pastor came in, and he was talking to me out in the hall. He's like, well, we're going to pray for healing and blah, 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 blah. And I looked at him and I'm like, no, we're praying for comfort.
Mm.
We're praying for dignity. We're praying for respect. We're praying for beautiful moments, right? She lived another 5 years, right? So like, but I just, it was like, no, 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 no. Like
He was horrified.
he was, and yeah, he looked at me like I was
Mm.
nuts. And I'm like I was a ghoul. And I'm like, wait a minute, you studied this stuff. Like
Right.
you should want.
Like she gets to go to heaven pretty soon. Like, go. It's amazing. You get to go to heaven pretty soon. Like,
right? Like I'm supposed to be this
Mm.
glorious place. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, why? Because I don't
Mm.
know, Nebraska's summers suck. I'm okay with like a place that's 70 degrees and I get to float around, do whatever, right? Like, I mean, look youthful, not wrinkled anymore. Like, come on, you're not worried about sunburns, like,
yes, redhead.
right? So, but yeah, like, it's so fascinating how much our like culture has made death the enemy, and then it has spilled into our medical system, right? Which
Mm.
great, right? We don't want doctors just ixnaying people, right? So it's balance. It's balance. We need to find the balance of loving life because we know it is precious. We know it's limited. And so finding that balance to live today so that tomorrow's not guaranteed for any of us.
Now, on the flip side of that, though, like if you do have something that, like we've had people like, oh, I want to make it to my granddaughter's wedding.
Absolutely.
That's next summer. Okay,
Let's find the path.
let's figure out how we can make that work, and what's that look like for you, and so like yeah, we do sometimes have a quantity of life that we're trying to achieve. Whether it's I want to live to be 90, like that's my goal. All of my relatives died at 74, and so I want to live, whatever that is.
And hopefully you're 89.
Right. Right. So like some people do have that, and so they can coexist. But again, looking through it like through that lens of, okay, what does that look like for you? If that's just you get to see it over Zoom because you're on hospice in a different state, you can make that happen. Or is it no, I want to walk with her and, dance with her at her, whatever that looks like. We can use that information to help you get there if possible.
I think the other thing too, just thinking of that one is like, if you start something, you can stop it, right? Like I think people get really confused on like, well, if I go after, like, say I have cancer and I'm doing chemo and all that, you can say it's enough. You can say I'm done, right? Like, I mean, I think that's where people get really confused too, is like, if you are of right mind, you can say I'm done, right? And so, or maybe you have renal failure and you have done dialysis for 10 years and you're like, you know what? I'm exhausted every time. I'm not getting the quality time in between. I don't want to do this anymore. It is your body. You have the choice to say when enough is enough. And I try and empower patients with that all the time, with like, it's your body. You tell me where you want your injection. You tell me where you want, what meds you want. Like, it's going in your body. I mean, I do that with my kids. Like, do you want to take the cold medicine or do you not? Like, it's your body. You choose. And so because you're the one living with the consequences, right? Like, I'm not throwing up for you after chemo. So I want to make sure you know what you're walking into so that you can make the decision that's best for you. And I've known people that have done like 1 or 2 rounds of chemo and then they were like, nope, this isn't for me and I'm not doing it. And then we get to switch and transition to hospice. I just wish we got people on hospice sooner. Pain management is amazing. The quality of care that you can get. It's been made such a bad word. And so I think we're really missing out on a place where people could get dignity, even with, my grandma passed away, my other grandma passed away recently at 103.
Mm.
And she just finally, one day, she just said, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And while we couldn't use the H word, right? Or palliative, which was an interesting one. She didn't want either of those words. I did ask her, I was like, well, do you want to focus on comfort and dignity? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, then let's go. Right. And
Mm.
I became a pretty big advocate for her in that space. And I had to help a lot of my family walk through it, which was hard. Which was also interesting to me because I'm like, you're 103, like, but that's a different identity issue that goes through, like, how we identify as a person is also the
Mm.
identity we create with people. Like, our
Yeah.
identities are like a web. um, and so understanding that that grief is individual to the relationship that people have with someone. So like, I had to really do some good eye opening and step back and help family through the lenses they were looking through the
Mm.
identities they had created with my grandma. So that was a huge eye opener for me. Just good reflection. But yeah, like, just when she was like, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm like, okay, like,
It's
let's,
empowering.
yeah, you get to choose.
Mm.
Yeah.
What you used a phrase when you were talking about the bucket list that caught my attention. So many of us think about the bucket list as before I die, I want to do these things. But the phrase that you used is before I can't.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, listener beware, but I want to talk about some of the life circumstances that people may face where these decisions have to be made outside of kind of the two big things that people think about. So one is, all of us want to die when we're 103. That's ideally, we would all go in our sleep when we've lived a long full life. And the other one that people, well, I guess I shouldn't put a blanket statement over all people, but what I feel like the most is, people think about the big C, cancer. So those are kind of like the two things that people are like, okay, I need to be thinking about end of life stuff when it comes to these things. But often people overlook something like an accident or a disability or something like that. And so we kind of put these conversations off until we're facing, old age or cancer. So, can we talk a little bit about this idea of the before I can't being a really important question to ask when it comes to quality of life and end of life planning?
I was thinking about a story that my sister and I had when we were very first starting our company. She said, "Well, this is really a great thing to do, but I'm 45. I don't need to have these conversations yet." And I said, "Did you drive your car from Omaha to Lincoln today?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Fate doesn't care that you're on your way someplace, that you have
Mm.
important things to do. You could get in a terrible car accident. Is your husband going to know what to do? He absolutely will not, because he can't do anything related to even a splinter or a paper cut with blood. He's a no go." So we have to have these conversations now because we don't know, right? Like, we've talked so much too, like, we have kids that are in their early 20s, boys
Mm.
who do dumb things.
Boys are dumb.
Boys are dumb. They do, they ski in and out
Love
of
boys.
trees.
Love them.
Oh yeah, I love my kids, but they do the dumb things.
Very risk tolerant.
Right. And so when you haven't had these conversations and something unexpected happens, it's often
Mm.
harder because you haven't had those conversations. You haven't thought, well, my 25-year-old kid now is going to be paralyzed and is in a vegetative state. Now what do we do? Right? Because you haven't had those conversations. And so it's more traumatic, it's more guilt, it's more second guessing every single thing because you haven't had that conversation. So, yes, please have the conversation young and frequently, all the time. How's that
How
for
do
an
we
answer?
I think that's a great answer. And immediately what I was thinking of was, Erin, you said when you're talking with your kids about something like taking cold medication and you're asking how they feel about it, are they okay with it? There are many parents who are in the position of having to make medical decisions for their child that their child would not okay with, but that it's the right thing to do for that, or I wouldn't even say the right thing to do, but the best thing to do with the knowledge that you have. And so when we're having conversations with our kids about things like this, how how do we make sure that they're age appropriate and also getting some of the information and knowing that with their limited awareness of and limited experience of what these things mean, how do we not like just scare the shit out of them when we're talking about this stuff? And so that, I mean, let's explore that a little
Right.
bit.
So, I mean, I'm blessed to have kids that have gotten used to. So, my background's trauma ICU.
Hmm.
So, obviously, I didn't come home and tell them all the nitty gritties of work in the morning. And I was always a night shifter. I'm not a fan of management, so I like night shift. So I would come home and be like, "Don't try and outrun a train, right? Like, wear your seatbelt. Don't play with guns. Don't take a handful of pills, especially a mixed handful of pills that you don't know what they are, right? And and so like my kids were exposed to it a little bit earlier. But I think like I've had to have an end of life conversation with an 8-year-old because I did oncology first before I went into
Hmm.
trauma ICU. And so, like, I had to sit with her in that space. I had to sit with her. I had to listen because here's the thing, experience and knowledge, just like we talked about earlier, doesn't come with letters behind your name. It also doesn't come on a timeline. I've known I've known 8-year-olds that are more mature, understand life and death at a better level than 88-year-olds, And so, but like one of the things that I hold on to is I had a 16-year-old who went through a bone marrow transplant. He did not want it. He did not want to go through any of it. And so he spent the last year of his life isolated from his friends in the hospital in a foreign town, far away because he lived in some small town somewhere. And then he didn't take his anti rejection meds, right? So his bone marrow reacted, and it was basically like a transplant reaction. And he ended up
Hmm.
dying from that. And so I think one of the things that we don't give kids enough credit is they're smart enough to know, right? Like they can know it, they can see it. I think again, you have to be a 2-year-old. You're gonna not probably having this conversation with. One thing is taking kids to funerals, right? Talking about
Hmm.
death, making it not a scary topic, making it just a reality, making it, there's a ton of books out there that are age leveled appropriate. Talk about aging, talk about the process, right? Talk
Well,
about what living is.
and use the real words.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, please
Hmm.
use
that's
the real words.
really, really huge. Like don't say things like
Sleeping.
we lost grandma. They
Hmm.
are concrete. They think, well, go find grandma if she is lost. That's when you lose your keys, you go find them. And so
Hmm.
when you use the words, like we talk about that even with body parts, right? If we want to keep them safe from sexual predators, we have to use the right terminology and empower those kids to say those words and practice those words and saying, and have the bodily autonomy. Same goes for death and dying. If we shroud it in, oh, they look beautiful, they look like they're sleeping, those kids are going to be
Hmm.
terrified to go to bed.
Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yes, we need to be age appropriate. We need to be, but also like they're developmentally appropriate. And there are so many great resources out there of people who have lived through it with their own family or their own kids or whatever. So it's not just all clinical stuff. There are really, really great resources, and having those conversations and normalizing it, I think, just makes everybody feel better because the kids know, like kids,
Hmm.
sound travels, right? You
Oh
can't
yeah.
tell me that a kid is going to be playing on their phone and in behind them their parents are talking about somebody who was getting old or got cancer or whatever. They can hear you. Sound travels.
Hmm.
So acknowledge it.
Well, and kind of cool. Well, kind of cool, sad, right? caveats always. But like my son is now, the one that was 19 is now 22. His birthday was yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. So, but he had a friend who was having massive back pain, right? She's 23, massive back pain.
Mm.
Finally got admitted in the hospital. She has a spinal tumor. She's 23. And because of the conversations he and I have had, he now
Mm.
gets to give the gifts to her, right? Because most 23-year-olds haven't talked about this. And he gets to sit with her and he knows, like, he'll ask me things and I'm a resource for him too, but he has to be willing to sit in that space, right? So it's like that
Mm.
comfort, that energy we talked about earlier, like that's transferable. It's taught. It can be, and so now he gets to go sit with her, and while all the other friends don't know what to say, and he's not going to know what to say either, right? Remember, because we say dumb things sometimes. But he can sit with her in that space, and when she says, things like "I'm scared" or "What's going to happen" or all that, he can help give some of those conversations, and he can just sit. Because let's be honest, when people are in those spaces, they don't want your advice, right?
Mm.
They want
Mm-hmm.
to talk, and they want to work it through out loud and with someone that can just be a sounding board and be present. Presence is so powerful. And so, like, and hopefully they will get the tumor, they will get the cancer, she will be able to do amazing. She was moving to go pursue her doctorate. So
Mm.
unfortunately, like, life has different paths for us sometimes. And so, you know what I mean? Like, just not being afraid, if we're comfortable with it as their parents, if we're comfortable with it as adults, sitting with them in those spaces. And one thing, like, one of my other son is 14. He has had a commencement little thing for 8th grade yesterday. It was a very busy day yesterday. And so I was so proud and excited. One of their classmates had passed away from cancer during the summer, a couple summers prior to that, and they acknowledged it. And that
Mm.
was huge and so powerful, because we keep doing this where we don't acknowledge kids that have died, especially at graduations and ceremonies. For adolescents specific, that is a killer, because that's all their brain's thinking about, is that person isn't here anymore, right? And
Mm.
so that's why, like, you'll see memorials, like roadside memorials, a lot of times are kids, right, or adolescents, because they need that physical space. They need to go to the place of the death, for their grieving and mourning process. Whereas we go more to the cemetery, or we go more, somewhere to the church or whatever. But kids really need that spot.
Mm.
And so, like, they actually talked about it, and I was just like, I sat there and I was like, thank you for acknowledging that someone lived, right? That someone, part of this community, is not here, and allowing that to settle. And I was so proud of that. I've never had a school do that. They always just, like, push it off to the side, don't want to talk
Mm.
about it. And I'm like, you think they don't know? You think they don't remember that friend that's not there with them? Like, they do. And by not talking about it, makes it actually worse. Because then we feel like we shouldn't be thinking about them. Then we have those doubts and those insecurities. So talking about it, oh, so important. Talk. And, like, if you've had somebody who's had a child pass away, or had problems, talk about it, because guess what? They know their kid didn't graduate, right? Like, so I think
Mm.
that's one of the hard things too, because now they get to celebrate their kid too. They get to bring that memory back and live in love and live in that space, if they're comfortable and willing, right? Like, that's always a very tenuous spot. But, like, we, especially with kid deaths, we don't allow people to talk about it. And it's like,
Well, it's sad. We
right,
don't want to make people sad. Sad's fine.
yeah,
Mm.
Sad is okay. There's not a good or a bad emotion. It's just an emotion. Sad is okay because it can coexist with the joy of the day also.
right, both can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Humans are messy, but cool.
So messy. Well, and that's a really good point too, is the more that we can develop the skill of sitting with complexity, the deeper our connections can be. So for example, if people are scared about death, they can also be sad at the same time. They can also be, I've talked with many parents who have children with medically complex needs or special needs, and when their child passes away, there's a sense of relief. And so many parents, and I've seen this also with people who have been caring for aging adults, or they're caregivers for someone who has a neurologically degenerative disease. They're dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, and the relief that they feel when that person passes away, they often feel tremendous amount of guilt and shame for that. And I would recommend that the better we become at sitting with the complexities of everything that we're feeling, the more connected we are to others and to ourselves. And that there's nothing that, if you say something to someone about a child that has passed away or someone that they love that's passed away, it's not like they're all of a sudden like, wait, what, like I forgot. It's not that you're bringing it to mind, it's that you're both looking at what the reality is together. And that's the one of the most compassionate things you can do, is stand side to side with somebody, shoulder to shoulder with them, and say, I'm looking at the same thing you are, and this freaking sucks. Like this is awful, and this is super hard, and I'll stand here next to you as long as you want to, looking at this thing.
Yeah. And when you share those things, whether you're the one acknowledging the death of a loved one of someone else or of your own, that does deepen your relationship, because inevitably they also know someone who has died, right? And
Mm.
so then you can share that experience with each other. And to your point, like when you share those things, that does deepen your relationship. Like I just met someone at a networking thing last week and was able to talk about my dad who died of Alzheimer's in September. And she
Mm.
was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "No, it's fine. He got to go to heaven. He's not dealing with this crap of Alzheimer's anymore." And she's like, "Yeah, you're right. And my grandma died of that a few years ago, and I hadn't really thought of it like that. I really miss her." And it's okay
Mm.
to really miss her, but it's also okay to say she's not dealing with that crappy, awful diagnosis anymore and everything that comes with it. So, just all the things we just said, deeper connections and complexities, and acknowledging that I did feel relief when my dad died, and that's
Mm.
okay. And saying that out loud gives permission to somebody else to say, "Yeah, I felt that too, and I thought I wasn't supposed to, and that was weird, and I didn't say it out loud because I didn't want someone else to think that I was a horrible person, that I was glad my dad
Mm.
died. No, like it was awful."
Mm.
Well, because again, focusing on quality, right? Like they weren't able to live the life they wanted, right? They weren't at the spot. Even like my grandma was 103. She was a fierce advocate her whole life, and she couldn't be for the last like at least 8 years or so. Like really, she just couldn't. She didn't have the stamina. She didn't have the hearing. She didn't have the abilities to do what she would have loved to do, right? So but that was real interesting to me because I didn't see it. Like I remembered my grandma as the fierce advocate, the one that could give you the look and would put you in your place real quick, even as an adult. But my kids never saw that side of her, right? Because it was my
Mm.
great grandma. They never saw that because they knew the last 8 years or so of her. And I'm like, huh, that's, you know what I mean? So it's also the perceptions we have. Like, I still remembered her as this, right? Even though she hadn't been that. And so, I think that's the thing too, is yeah, we've got to be able to sit in those spaces, think about that quality of life, think about how we can, bring people together. Cause that's it. If you're sitting alone, right? Like that's the hard. If I don't say it out loud, if I don't say to Amy or to you, like, yeah, man, this really sucked. I mean,
Mm.
I'm glad she's free. I'm glad her spirit and her energy is out there. Because I feel guilty, feeling like, God, that creates then a barrier between us, right here on this world. And so, like that's not going to do anyone any good. And then grief can't turn into mourning, and then grief gets stuck. And once grief gets stuck, it comes out in a whole lot of different ways, in addiction, in running away from it, in workaholic,
Mm.
in whatever, right? Grief that gets stuck. Grief is not a place to live. Grief is a place to visit, but not a place to live. And when grief gets stuck, then we have a lot of other problems because it's going to be visible, but it won't be good. And so we've got to quit making grief the enemy. We've got to lean into that space and process with it. Like the idea of going through it is different, but we got to process with it because it's a bag. It's going to come with us from now on, from this point forward. How do we work with it? And we do that by working with other people, communicating, connecting, sharing it, being human
Hmm.
together. I think that gets really hard for people. Is like no one wants to talk about it because it's sad. Well, yeah, it's sad. Lots of things in life are sad, but it's also natural. And so I think, like Amy said earlier, like we've given labels to emotions of good or bad. They're not. Even anger isn't bad. Anger means a boundary's been crossed, right? If you're angry, you've got a boundary crossed. So why? What was it? Like, lean into it. Don't act, don't act the rage piece of it, but
Hmm.
anger can have a lot of passion with it. And so figuring out why we're having the feelings we're having, leaning into them, and then sitting and having conversations with people, right? And that's the biggest healer that I think is conversation, communication, connection. Those are the
Hmm.
things that are going to heal us.
I don't think I've heard anyone make a distinction before between grief and mourning. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
So there's a Dr. Alan Wolfelt. He has some great theories and philosophies on grief and mourning. But grief is in his kind of way is grief is singular. Grief is mine. I own my grief. Mourning is collective. So
Hmm.
transitioning that grief that I have into mourning is how we heal, right? We have to transition it out of just myself into the group. And that's why funerals are so important. And it boggles my brain when we start saying, well, we want to have parties. No, funerals are meant. We've had funerals longer than we've had weddings. Like as a culture, as a society, right? Funerals are so important. We need that time together to talk about the person, to
To
switch, to
cry.
cry, to switch through, to laugh at the stupid stuff we did with that person, and then cry because we missed them, and then remember that they hated hot tamales, whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
that healing, it sews it back together, right? Like, and so not that the scar is going to go away, but we sew it back together through the community and the connection. We are animals. I know people like to think that because we're humans and we can drive cars that we're fancy, but we are basic primitive animals, that we are a communal space. And that means for our feelings, we got to go through that community space. So yeah, grief is singular. It's my grief. You don't get to have my grief, but you have your grief. And when we bring it together, then we get to transition it to mourning and do the collective and
Hmm.
and and heal with it. Right? Again, I think the big transition is people think you get through it and you walk out on the other side unscathed. No, grief is messy. It's going to fight for you because grief is love. Like you're going to have some people that you like grieve for a ton, right? Because
Or animals or
or animals,
pets.
right? That's why, because you see your pet, your dog wags his tail every time you come home, all that stuff. You've had 15-year connection with him, and then he's gone. Versus like my dad and I didn't have a very good relationship together. I didn't have a loving, connected relationship with him. So I didn't grieve as hard for my dad as I did for my dog who I'd had for 15
Hmm.
years. And I feel guilty about that. Like it sounds horrible. People are like, oh, but then people get it once you realize like I was more connected to my dog. He was my
Hmm.
fluffy baby, right? Like, I mean, and he's been gone a long time. So is my dad. And it's just like, but I still think about my dad too, but not in the same ways. So it
But
can get real complicated too when you start having those. Cause like, then I have to grieve the relationship I never had with my dad, right?
Hmm.
That I wanted, right? So that's probably a whole nother, mental development,
right, different
but
rabbit hole.
right. So, but yeah, I mean, I just think you think about it like elephants grieve, whales grieve, like all these,
Dog,
they
our pets
all,
do.
right.
Our
They,
pets
they,
grieve
they
when
grieve, and you have to, you mourn with them, right? We mourn as a collective. And so
Hmm.
But that is why funerals are important.
Oh,
And
funerals are so important.
when we're done with the funeral, we eat, right?
Mm.
Because that's what society does when you get together with other people and you have that meal where we are actively keeping our own bodies alive as we talk about what we all just went through together. Like
Hmm.
it's kind of trauma bonding, but maybe not trauma, but you're talking about the people and the stories and the laughter and the tears, and there should be Kleenexes at every after funeral luncheon because that's part of the process and how important it is, and we just try and skip over it sometimes because, oh, dad didn't want a funeral. Well, dad doesn't get to decide this one thing. Dad doesn't get to decide. We're having a funeral, we're calling it a funeral, and we can get into the nuances of what words mean and what's a funeral, what's just a memorial service, but it doesn't matter. You're getting together as a group talking
Right.
about the person and how
Hmm.
important that is to all of our psyches. Like it's critical.
And it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars,
No.
right? Like I think that's something too, is people are getting caught up in all the finances of a funeral. Like a funeral can be sitting around the coffee table, having a beer and remembering the person and
Yeah.
having conversations. Like like I think people get real caught up in like, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. It can look like anything, but
Hmm.
the important part is the collective time. And I think we're getting really lost. I think we have grief on a lot of different things that we keep hiding,
Hmm.
and that is cause when I look at like our society at large is like you talked about the ability to sit in complexity. It's the ability to sit in discomfort, the ability to sit in grief, the ability to sit there and not have to fix it right away, right? Like just be there. And I think we have a huge issue, not only with death in our culture, but also with just grief and anything that's uncomfortable. Um, as an educator now, I see students that struggle with anything that's uncomfortable. If it's uncomfortable, it means it's bad. And I'm like, no, if
Hmm.
it's uncomfortable, it means you're growing, right? Like if you are comfortable in my class, I haven't done my job. Like if you're comfortable the
Hmm.
whole time, I haven't done my job, right? Like my job is to push you outside of that comfort so that you learn, so you grow, so you know where your grit is, right? Like that resiliency. And right, overwhelmed, nope, we've gone too far. So like it's that sweet spot, but for everybody, it's going to be different, right? That's the thing too, is like grieving is going to be different for every single person and what we grieve, but we have to, right? We have to, or like it. There's a really great quote out there. Who is that? Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry
Tyler
said.
Perry's like, it waits for you. Grief waits,
Hmm.
and you can try and drink it away. You can try and outwork it. You can try and do whatever, but grief waits for you. And if you don't do it, it's going to wait until you give it the space. And then once you give it the space, whew, it can be messy. and
That makes me think of the role of both public and private ritual. So if we're going to make the distinction between grief and mourning as something that's personal and something that's collective, I can see how asking yourself questions about what things bring you joy and then integrating grief rituals and grief practices into some of that so that you are holding space for the complexity of what grief is, and that those things can be very personal to you. And I really appreciate that that you are using the term funeral not in such a rigid way. I'm in a death and dying class right now, and we've been talking a lot about end of life and death and dying in different subcultures within a Western culture. So we didn't really explore a lot of, end of life care or funeral memorial practices outside the United States. But even within the United States, you have people that come from a wide variety of different cultures that process collective grief and mourning differently, so that the funeral doesn't have to look like open casket at the front of the room at the memorial home or the funeral home, and they have this type of lining in the coffin. It can look like any number of things. And we just did a class yesterday where there was a presentation on body disposition. And this is a really fascinating topic because, usually we think, okay, it's either in the coffin or it's cremation. And there are so many different things now that you can do not only just for body disposition, but also if you want to use the cremains in a creative way. Like you can have cremains pressed into a vinyl record and have a song that's played on it, or pressed into a piece of jewelry or blown glass. And so I like this encouragement for all of us to not take such a narrow view of what death and dying and grief and mourning look like, but to infuse your personality, your preferences, your joy into this, like you said, this very natural part of being human that we are all going to face, and that we can look at it with curiosity instead of fear. And that's, I think that's a skill that also is developed and is part of that growth mindset that you were talking about. It's like, yes, of course, none of us really want to be like, okay, yeah, I know for sure my body is going to break down and at some point I'm not going to be here anymore. And that, you know, eventually there's just going to be nobody left who remembers me. That's like, that's a really terrifying kind of place to take your mind and your imagination to. And I really believe that the more that we can be brave about looking at our own mortality, the better life we live. It's all in service to then becoming so clear on the things that are important to us now, that we have the power of being present with what is, when we're able to look at our own mortality very clearly and with a lot of courage.
Yeah. You brought up a couple things that, like, so I teach a class also on death and dying, but I'm at a very traditional college. So I've got 18 to 22 ish year olds. And I did a couple different activities with them. And one of them was they had to walk through a cemetery, right? I
Mm.
was like, you got to walk through a cemetery. I was kind of, to some degree, a scavenger hunt. I need to come up with a better word for it, because that sounds not really beneficial. But so I gave them like 10 different things to look for, and they had
Mm.
to find 5 of them. And so, like a baby's grave, somebody of a different culture,
Mm.
that kind of stuff. And it was fascinating, like reading their reflections and seeing how they pulled the pieces together. Now, not all the students, I had the ones that just like wanted, took the pictures, did the thing, whatever, right? But the ones that really leaned into it was so cool to see, because they were like, I'd never really walked through a cemetery. I'd never
Mm.
really seen and spent time reading scripture or reading stuff, poems, recipes, whatever people put on the stones and the memorials, right? And I gave them options. They could find like roadside ones, they could find, but they had to still go walk through a cemetery. And it was
Mm.
really fat. One student wrote that it was, a cemetery is a library of lives. And
Mm.
I love that idea of the library of lives, right? Just seeing what was out there and the possibilities and the things. But some of the stuff that was fascinating, like in the reflection, I had them do like one reflection, like at the end, just like, what tools did you learn through this that you're going to take forward? And then just, of course, anything that you want the faculty to know. And one student, or I think two, wrote like, this class changed my life. It was an 8-week class, right? 8 weeks online. Like, I didn't get to have the connection with them that I wanted to, but just the self exploration of death, right? That it is life changing, because it changes how you live today. And I think that's
Mm.
what people don't realize too, is like, one, like Amy talked about, empowering. That word gets used a lot, but it really is one of those things. By acknowledging death, we get to live today, right? And we get to live the today that we want. And even one of the activities I have the students do is they have to write their eulogy, right? They write their eulogy, and I have them do it at the beginning of the 8 weeks, right? So they write their eulogy. Well, we all know we don't get to write our eulogies. Someone else does, right? We get to live them. And so at the end, then I had them take the eulogy they had written, and then I have them make a plan of how they're going to live it, right? How are you going to live this eulogy? Pick out the 3 things that you really hit on in that eulogy. What are your action items? What are you going to do to live it? And I think that's one of the best self reflections to do when you're struggling. Like, I need to go to work. I need to do this. I need to do this. What do you want in your eulogy? Because you get the choice of living it, right? Someone else is going to write it. You live it. And so using that as a reflection piece, when life gets busy, right? Spend a few minutes. What do I want in my eulogy? Well, if I want in my eulogy that I'm a good mom, when work calls for help and I have a planned couch date with my kids are going to write my eulogy. So I'm going to give them the couch date, right? Like, sorry, can't come into work. I can these other days. I can help out with shifts, whatever. But tonight, it's my kids' time, right? And so I think it's real easy to get pulled in this world. We're busy. We've got lots of things, sports, school things, right? We've got so much that's pulling us. Sometimes we just have to slow down. What do we want in our eulogy, and are we living it, right? And just a really great reflection tool when life gets busy and you're overwhelmed. Like, take a moment, right? Because we get to live that, and that's really, really is empowering, right? To know that we do have the power over that piece.
I think that's another reason why a lot of people don't broach these subjects is they're like, I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't have the time to think about this, I don't have the time to talk about this. And so to that end, I want to ask, what are some maybe like three things that if someone is just going to start, if they're going to say, okay, this like elephant of end of life conversations are, it's too big, I just need to take like a bite, what are three things that you would recommend people do right off the bat that are like most important, need to be top of mind, maybe questions they need to get asked or ask, or specific documentation that they need to put in place? What are those things from your perspective?
I would say that, especially when it comes to documentation, if you are going to choose someone to be your voice that is not in the natural hierarchy of who it would be your natural medical power of attorney, you have to document that person officially.
Can you really quickly say, in because I know this can vary from state to state, but can
Yeah.
you say what that hierarchy is so that people are
So,
like, oh crap, like I really for sure don't want that
right.
person to make a
Well,
decision for me.
right. Yes, absolutely. And it will vary from state to state. But generally speaking, it'll be your spouse if you're married. If you're not married, it will either be a parent or your oldest child.
If they're in
If
Nebraska, if they're 19.
if they're right, if they are of
Okay.
age. If they're not, it might be one of your siblings. And then it might just be whoever is loudest in the room with you at the time. So if you were brought in by your next door neighbor and they can't get a hold into the hospital and they can't get a hold of anybody in your phone, your next door neighbor is going to be your voice. So you have the power to decide who your medical power of attorney is. And then, we want you to share your wishes with them and then document who that person is. Because if you don't, and it's that natural hierarchy, and they either don't know what you want or they're going to do things to you that you don't want, you're in
Mm-hmm.
trouble, because
Mm.
they get to decide when your voice no longer works, and they can also overturn things that you've documented or that you've talked about. So pick your medical power of attorney very, very carefully and have these conversations. If they say, "Oh, I don't think I can do what you want," say thank you, bye bye, and take
Mm.
somebody else, because you want them to be your voice, not what they want. Because I have literally
Can
had a daughter say, I am my mother's medical power of attorney, and I know that's probably what she would want, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what I
mm,
want. And whoa, that was a terrible situation and an uncomfortable
mm.
conversation, and that can go a whole different way than you want. So choosing your medical power of attorney, I think, is kind of the most important piece of it, and document that if it's not the natural hierarchy.
And there's a lot of
How
really simple ways to do it.
Oh yeah.
That's what I was just going to ask, is like, are people going on LegalZoom and printing out their own stuff, or how do people make this official?
Right. So it depends. State to state, you have different rules. State of Nebraska is, you can print off a general form that is the Nebraska Medical Power of Attorney form. You fill it out with your information, your main person, your backup person. You should always have a backup, and then you have to have two witnesses. And those witnesses can't be the people that you've just named. Some
Okay.
places are going to require a notary, but I think most banks have a notary. Libraries might have a notary. It's really not super hard to find it. You just have to be intentional and just do it.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about your medical power of attorney, also, like, it might not you might not want to choose your spouse because they might not be able to let you go if that is what you want.
Hmm.
So just be really thoughtful about who you're choosing. But yeah, it's not super cumbersome. You just have to know your state's rules and how to find that form and what the requirements are. But
And pick two,
Okay.
not nine.
yeah, oh
Like
yes,
like we've had families who have had like 9 kids, and they didn't want to pick between all of them, so all of them were
Oh gosh.
POAs, and it was.
that's nightmare.
And again, the family's going to get destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Because like I love how Amy always will say, like, people can't pick a restaurant. You can't get 9 people to
Right.
go on a restaurant. There's no way they're going to be able to agree on what mom or dad wanted, right? So making sure that you have, we were at a legal thing and they said like multi-generational. So having like one that might be your partner, but then having somebody of a younger
Hmm.
generation also be on there, right? Because you just don't know. And so those are things that you want to think about too. But like there's 5 Wishes is a great tool to get started in having these conversations. I think it's like $1 online or
$5, five, yeah.
$5 or something like that, or you can get it for your whole church group for like $1 a piece. Like that's a great tool. There's lots of like end of life conversation groups out there that are got documents and stuff like that. So you just have
Hmm.
to kind of
Yeah.
find your pastor if you're in church. That's a great one. They usually know resources a lot of times in those. Your doctor, you can just go like, I mean, so
Right.
doing your POA is relatively simple part of this. The harder part is like having the conversation. While it seems like that should be the easy part, right? Talking
Hmm.
versus the legal documentation. Oftentimes, that's the more challenging part because it's just more emotional, right? Like, so saying, "Hey, Amy, you're my POA," that's a little bit easier to just be like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." But it's a little bit harder when people are now, okay, now let's sit and talk about what that actually means.
Yeah.
And that's where like the bucket list is a great one, or what brings you joy, stuff like that, and then starting to peel back like, once I can't do those things,
Hmm.
what do I want, right? Like I don't love eating. Like eating is not my thing, but being outside and being out active and all that kind of stuff is mine. So learning about people's own specialties or loves really will help. So
There are several tools out there. There's one that I love called the Death Deck. It's a
Hmm.
it's they look like playing cards, and there's a game associated with it, but you really don't need to play it as a game. You can just, on a car ride, if you're gonna drive for an hour or two, go on a road trip, pull out the Death Deck, and it's prompts for questions that are deliberate and insightful and can get to the meat of what you want to talk about versus just kind of this surface level stuff and the weather and what did you make for dinner.
Hmm.
And so it really, if you don't know how to peel back those layers, there are some tools out there. Death Over Dinner is an online resource. Endwell, I'm sure, has lots of things. AARP has lots of resources on their website. We are a great resource. I'm going to
yeah,
plug us again.
yeah.
Like, we have a great workbook that helps you
Hmm.
navigate some of those conversations with people who are easy to have the conversation with, but also people who are a little harder to have that conversation with, because we have all of these complex relationships in our life, but we might need to have those conversations with the harder people. And how do you
Hmm.
do that? So it can be scary and uncomfortable, but it's a lot. It can be made a little bit easier if you do it, over a meal or snacks and a beer, or and then just pull out the workbook and just like use it as a script. Even, it's okay. No one's going to judge you. Well, they might judge you. No one No one's going to fault you for needing a
Yeah.
resource if you've never had this conversation before. It's okay.
I was gonna say people
Yeah.
are gonna judge you no matter what, so you might as well just do it, right? Like, I
For
mean,
sure.
like, at this point, like that's the thing I like being in my 40s. Like, you just don't care as much, right? Like, you just like whatever. You judge me, I'm gonna still do it. So
So it sounds like number one is to choose a power of attorney
yeah.
and to get the documentation where you are naming who your primary choice is, who your secondary choice is. And that an important next step of that is to have conversations with that person who has been named as your power of attorney about specific end of life stuff. Do you also recommend then like having a document perhaps attached to the POA that says what your wishes are about particular
You
things?
can, and that
Beneficial.
that will definitely help if there are any other people in your life that might question, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
no, mom wouldn't definitely would not have wanted that, Well, she documented it. So it can definitely help in the times, everybody's family dynamics are different. And if your dynamics are that no, we need to document down to the nth degree, then definitely do it. If your family dynamics are, no, we're all on the same page and we all are working together, we've all had these conversations together literally for our whole lives, and it's not going to be in question, then it's not maybe as necessary.
Yeah.
You should still document your medical power of attorney. That would be the critical piece of all the things, but then you just have to look at your individual needs, I think. And there's no one size fits all answer. And when you go to an attorney to do some of these things, even, they're not, unless they're a special kind of attorney that knows some of these medical things, they may not be able to explain
Yeah.
what some of those medical things are. And they shouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
to know that, right? We're not lawyers. And so we can't explain the law stuff, but they are not in the medical field unless they were a doctor first and now they're an attorney, which happens. But they might not be able to answer some of those questions. So that's when you have to either come to us or find other resources to explain what those
Okay.
things are.
And I would say definitely if you say that your documentation is in a spot, have it there. So just as a kind of funny story for my grandma that died several years ago, she always told us everything was in the green box. She would point to it even, say in the green box. There,
Mm.
all of my documents are in the green box. By golly, when that woman died, there was nothing in the damn green box.
Oh no.
So, right? Like, so, well, I should say there was one thing. It was her teaching contract when she was 16. That was one page long
Interesting.
that she signed with a different name, and like had number 13 on there was just all dashed lines. So I'm like, well, that's an interesting contract. But that was the only thing in the green box. So if you do have a place that you keep stuff, keep it. Put it in there. Like, don't. It's not a good time for a joke, right? So
That's what I was thinking. Was like there's a note that was like, gotcha.
yeah, exactly. Like, keep it. Like,
Yeah.
no,
That's
it was
I like my kids. I'm not going to do that to
right.
them.
So I think
Mm.
that's the other thing. I think that's a great point too, Amy. Like, we like our kids. We love our kids. We don't want them to be fighting at a funeral. There are lots of fights that are going to happen just because there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of just
Mm.
turmoil, right? You may have kids that haven't seen each other for a long time. You may have family members that come out of the woodwork, whatever, right? If you like your kids, if you like your family, have stuff documented, written down, discussed. It also doesn't do any good if you have the paperwork done, but you didn't talk to anyone, so they don't know.
They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
They know what my
Mm-hmm.
wishes are. No,
Right? No, please don't. Like, have the conversation, because like, I know, like in the ICU, I've seen both. I've seen when families have had the conversation ahead of time and it's like, yeah, dad wouldn't want any of this, right?
Mm.
And they get to grieve and just grieve, right? They just
Yeah.
get to grieve. I mean, because they're going to walk out of there without their dad anyways, right? Like, so, because I mean, we can do a lot of things in healthcare, but we still are not miracle. Like, there's only so many miracles we can try and
people
help.
are going to die.
People die, right?
I mean, that's what your podcast is, right?
Yeah. And then but I've also seen the other sides of the family where, yeah, like they've had the conversations and they get to be in that space and in that place and they get to have beautiful last moments together
Mm.
versus fighting, right? So just please, please have the conversations sooner, have them often, have them, you can make them funny. I mean, we're fine with that. We don't have a thing against humor. So you can make them funny, like, hey, I don't want to be buried, with a motorcycle. I don't know. Right. I mean, you can have those conversations, but we need to have them. And so I think that's the biggest thing is starting the conversation. However, it
This
works for
is
you.
this is a really important point that really shifted the way that I thought about things for my own mortality, was the gift that you give the people that you love when you make these decisions ahead of time. In my experience, I we have a daughter who passed away when she was 14, but we knew when she was 3 that that was the trajectory of her life. And so my husband and I had really, really, really hard, crappy conversations when she was still pretty little about, particularly about, like, do you want to have her in a casket or do you want a cremation? And my thought was, the more conversations we have when we're calm, when we are not in an emergency situation, when, it still sucks. It's never going to not suck to think about these things and have these conversations. But I knew that if we were trying to decide in those moments what to do, if we didn't agree on something, it was going to make that situation so much more intense, so much more full of grief and heartache, because we needed that other person in those moments to be with us on the same page. And so, in the same way, when we're thinking about ourselves, when we're thinking about the people that we love, what we're giving them is the gift of being able to be present with what is happening, instead of having to scramble to know who to call and what to do and what are we doing next and all of that. You don't need all of that stress in those moments. What you need in those moments is to just be there, just to be there.
Yep.
And so the gift that you give the people that you love is to have these conversations ahead of time, for sure.
100%.
Yep.
Yep.
I mean,
and if, like, nobody, I don't think many people like chaos. And so if you can just turn the temperature down, because and hold each other's hands and just be in the moment and just look at what's happening and feel that together, instead of the running around like chickens with your heads cut off. Like, nobody likes that feeling in their body. So yeah, like you hit the nail on the head. Like, we can have these conversations and they're going to suck, but having them in that calm versus in that chaos, like, nobody makes good decisions in chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's physiologically impossible. Our brains are not able to do it physiologically. So,
and that's where a lot of like second guessing and regret lives, is the decisions that we make in the chaos.
Exactly. You guess, you second guess, you have guilt, you have trauma. I mean, that's just what happens. And I don't want that. I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that for my patients or their families. Like, have this conversation now. When you're with them all the time, like, let's talk about this instead of talking about how the weather sucks again today, or is it a beautiful day together? Okay, take a walk and let's talk about this.
Beautiful weather. How do you want to die? On that note, I mean, it's a little bit of a right turn, but super important. What is the role of humor when we're talking about this? And like you guys have mentioned, and I've heard people say, anybody who works in hospice, anybody who works in end of life care, like, you really have to have a good sense of humor for this stuff. And so, can you talk a little bit about the role of humor when we're having these conversations? And there's really no clear border between like talking about something hard and like it becoming sacrilegious,
right?
But so like let's talk about like the role of humor.
Use your emotional intelligence. Watch body language.
Right. Watch when someone tenses up and you're like, "Ooh, sorry, wrong crowd."
That was too much.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll tell people, like, I'm in healthcare. Like, I was a trauma ICU nurse. Like, there's not much that's off the table for me for conversations. Apparently at dinner, though, there are things you should not talk about.
But again, I'll know to your audience.
Right,
like, she and I can talk about that all day long, and it's not a big deal.
You want to talk about blood? Great. But like, I think that was something. It was so funny when my grandma Young was passing away, and and this was the one that a long time ago. Like I remember the pastor came in and he was like, "This is the weirdest family." He's like, "You guys can go from crying to laughing to crying to laughing, like so." He's like, within seconds, within fluid, we can do it at the same time. So it was so funny to us because like our family, just everything's humor. My mom had cancer and I put temporary ant tattoos on her head while she slept, right? So that when she, right, so when she woke up after feeling cruddy and all that, she was pasty white. I mean, she's whiter than me. So I'm like, so like she had these black ants on her head, right? Like, so I think humor is so important. Again, know your audience. You might have to like dabble and you might have to apologize. Be okay apologizing. Be like, whoa, sorry, that was a little too dark or a little too far, or maybe you weren't ready for it. But laughter pulls us out, right? Like laughter, one, is contagious, it's great energy, but it pulls us out of that limbic system. It pulls us out of that feeling fog. It like, wait a minute, what am I talking about, right?
But it's also like, a dopamine release.
It is.
So it floods your body with
right,
good
so
chemicals. And like we can coexist in that. This sucks and I'm crying and it's so sad, but also like,
well, then I look at me, I look like crap, right? Like I mean,
yeah, it's the complexities that it's important.
Yeah, like I think that's the stuff. Like, like I shouldn't have wore, you're bawling or crying, look like crud, and then you're like, I shouldn't have wore eye makeup today, right? Like it's just being vulnerable, being like not taking some of the stuff too seriously. I think humor is a huge piece of it, and I think again, people, when you tell people how they should deal with it, then they're more worried about the box that you've given them, not what they need to process. And so I think that's just the thing. You got to read the room. If you're in a room with a bunch of people who are like sticks in the mud, then you're gonna angle it different, right? Like so. But if you're in a room of people that are like curious, and I find that when we do the classes, we laugh, right? We're like, oh, well, this is dumb, right? Or whatever, right? Like, and humor really just, it gets us regrounded. Again, builds those connections with people. Humor's kind of vulnerable in and of itself, right? So again, building that safe place. It's not, you don't want to laugh at someone, right? Like that's the thing. You don't want to laugh at someone like, oh my God, you tripped over the floor, right? Or whatever. You want, it's almost, sometimes it's easier to put the humor in on yourself first, right?
Because I'm the one who tripped,
right?
And so then I laugh and
right.
give permission for everybody else to laugh. But also, like if you're in that group with what seemed like all the sticks in the mud, maybe they're not. Maybe they're just pretending. And if you
or
open
trying to be fit.
right, I'm not supposed to be laughing, and so that I don't. But if you open that door just a little bit and you just do a little tickle of something, and then you have one or two start to laugh, you're like, this feels good. Your people that are, your person that's dying, like they don't want you to live in that sad. Yeah, I want you to be a little sad because you're going to miss me, but also like I loved it when we laughed together. So laugh, laughing.
Yeah,
I think the laughing is like it's almost like a signal of emotional safety. And I like what you said, Erin, about how it pulls you out of kind of that limbic system, in that the laughing and the humor pulls us out of the fight and flight. Because if you're really in danger, you're really not going to be laughing. And so it's almost like this beacon that kind of alerts everybody, like, hey, we're all in this space together, we're all safe right here, it's whatever we're feeling is okay. And it's like, it's kind of the same reason why, like, I think the role of comedians in talking about hard things is so important, because there's this, it almost is like this doorway into, this is a safe place psychologically for us to explore these concepts. And so I'll put a little plug in here. I made these as part of my requirements for my class, but I made conversations cards that are before, they're called Before You Go.
Yeah.
And I have a big chunk of these. The category is humor. So I'm asking questions like, if you had to think of an ostentatious or ridiculous vehicle to be the hearse for you, what would it be? Questions like that. And it's a really powerful way to kind of dig into some of these harder places with people if you can talk about the absolute absurdity of death and like how many things are outside of our control. It's just kind of nuts and absurd, this funny little thing that we do as humans uh where we're so uncomfortable with things that are unsure. But if we can broach some of these conversations with a lot of like levity, I think another beautiful way to connect on a deep level with people.
Yeah, I love that you made those. I just remember that Allison sent me a picture of them and said, "Did I remember to connect you with Morgan?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you did." And but the picture that she sent was a whole box of
Oh,
your cards.
awesome.
So I love that you did that. That's amazing.
I guess
Thanks.
there's a book, I think it's called Stiff by, I believe, Mary Roach.
Oh, I already like it.
And like she goes through, like, each chapter is a different way we deal with bodies. And
Ah.
so she's a journalist, I believe, and does, but yeah, and talks about different things that they'll do with dead bodies. But it was so like she does it with a sense of humor. Like, it doesn't take it, there's a couple chapters in there that I'm like, I could listen to. I did it on Audible, but I could listen to it one time and I'm like, I can't listen to that chapter again. But then there are other ones that you're just like, what, like the connections she would draw was just funny. And so yeah, I think I have it both in print and on Audible, just because it was
Who's the author
I think
again?
it's Mary Roach. I think it's called
Roach. Okay.
I need to read that.
It's like, you're just like, but it's, I mean, it's research based. It's like going in, like, I think one of the things is like about crash test dummies. One of them's about cruise. I don't know. Like, she pulls in different things. It's been a while since I listened to it, but it was a good book. It was probably back when we had CDs. It was probably when I actually listened to it.
What?
Right? Like, that dates.
On that topic of books, what are maybe just a handful of books that you guys would recommend? I know Amy, you had already said in an email to me Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and I like shout that book from the rooftops because it made such a positive impact on me. But what are some of the
Erin
other?
doesn't like that book, but how it shifts for me is when I have a physical visceral reaction when someone says, "Well, it's just not safe." Oh, okay. Again, like, if it's not safe for your mom to live at home where she has lived for 50 years and gets to have her garden, let's talk about, if you're so concerned about safety, like, let's talk about how either ways to keep her safe, or let mom know if something happens and you fall and someone might not find you for 2 days, what's that look like, right? So that was my huge takeaway from Being Mortal, is like, we put safety above almost everything else, to our own detriment, right? Erin takes a lot of risks physically with mountain climbing and all those things, and because it brings her joy. And so, like, that's where Being Mortal was huge for me, is thinking about it that way. And I also listened to that on Audible, but
Get better on Audible.
yeah, maybe other books,
like Alan Wolfelt. He has a ton of great books on grieving. So
if you get one, you
get the gist.
So
okay, he'll also he has some books on like getting stuck. I went to one of his conferences or workshops with getting stuck when grief gets complicated and stuff like that. So that's the only one if you're like struggling. I used it actually for my death, dying, and grief course, and students really, really liked it because it was a simple read, had some really powerful, like, poignant, like, snapshots of stuff in it. I think that one was like In the Shadows of Grief by him. But yeah, like he has really, really great theories and philosophies with it.
I think
there's a ton of great kids books out there for people that have kids. There was one, oh gosh, it was like, it had a bear on the front. I'm trying to think, a student shared it. But it used the word dead, like they died. And I really liked that one because it kept it really simple for kids, but like looking at the language, we're pretty intentional about using the word dead or died. We will use passed away just because that's the one that's very used comfortably for people, but using again those medical terms, those those kinds of pieces was really important. I'm trying to
I
think.
think anything by Barbara Carnes.
Oh yeah.
She has been a
Oh yeah.
hospice nurse for a long, long time, and I kind of call her the queen of hospice, at least in the U.S. All she has booklets that are very, very easy to read,
We talk about the
and
dying
they talk
process.
about the dying process, and
Mm.
it's obviously a little bit of a hospice slant to things, but I think that her philosophies and her language and her approachability are all really, really easy to digest in her booklets. She also does a lot of writing on her website with blogs and things. So if you don't like maybe like the bigger books, but
Yeah.
smaller booklets, really easy.
And then if you're looking for stuff like obviously like Brene Brown has a lot on like emotional and like those kinds of things too, like vulnerability
Mm.
and that stuff. So I mean, just sometimes those are good ones just to help understand emotionals, understand the brain, understand the complexity of stuff. So those are more like self-reflection ones, but they're also really good just for getting people into those spaces of willing to have conversations,
Mm.
even, and
Mm-hmm.
building some of that presence that we've talked about a lot. So those are good ones. I'm big on like podcasts. I'll listen to like Brene Brown's podcasts and stuff like that. So um, but yeah, I mean, it's just there's a ton of resources out there. You just have to kind of find ones that fit what you're
Mm-hmm.
going through. And if you get through like the first like 10, 15 pages and it's not hitting it, the language you don't like, get a different one, right? Don't spend time trying to make it fit your situation or fit your take the pieces that resonate, sort of like a tarot card reading, right? Like take what resonates, leave the rest. And because everybody's going to take different pieces from stuff. So those are kind of some resources, some books. I'm trying to think if there's any others
Well,
that it's like, I
there's
mean, there's so
so
many,
many.
but yeah,
You just
but
have to
Yeah.
figure out what medium works for you, whether it's TikToks that are only a minute long, or podcasts that are 30 minutes or an hour, or a book that is 500 pages. Like you have to just figure out what works for you. And it might
Yeah.
change based on your circumstance. Like today, it might be all I have time for is one podcast, but 3 years from now, a big book. So you
right.
just have to figure, you change too. So
Yeah. What I'm hearing in this is that it's really important for us to not assume that anybody else is going to take care of this for us. Like we have to
yes.
be brave and be diligent to find ways to get comfortable in having these conversations and get comfortable thinking about these things for ourselves. And if we've gone to a class or something and that hasn't fit for us, like don't give up, because these conversations are too important to avoid. So just find the things that work for you. One last book that I'll recommend is called Tuesdays with Maury,
Mm,
which is a really beautiful, well told story of a man with ALS, and how he talks about something that I care deeply about is the internal journey into acceptance of our mortality, acceptance of knowing that somebody else is going to have to take care of us at some point, most likely, acceptance that there is this great mystery beyond what any of us really want to have a grasp on, that we want to have the solid answers for, and we just don't, which is why there's so much fear around these topics. And so, how do we cultivate um, not just like a resignation that this is how it's happening, but like a true acceptance that then results in deeper connection and curiosity with others and ourselves. So is there I mean we're pretty much wrapping up. I feel like we've covered so much ground. Is there anything that comes to mind that has been part of either your personal or professional experience that you're like, I got to make sure we talk about this, that we say this?
I mean, I feel like
Or have we just like knocked it out of the
I think
park?
we've done, I mean, so many circles, right? Like explored all sorts of things. I think the biggest thing, like I said, for me anyway, is please have the conversations, right? Like
Yeah.
just what I hate as a nurse, as a person that sat in those rooms is I hate when I have to go in and ask an 80-year-old woman what her husband's wishes are at 3, right? And she's like, I don't know. We never talked about it. It came on so suddenly. And I'm like, you had 60 years of marriage, right? So, and then I have to, while there's beeps and buzzes and all the things going on, I have to walk her through, like, well, what did he enjoy doing? And we can do it, right? Like but you're going to walk away with more than just grief at that point in time. And so I think having those conversations, I don't think people understand the power they have until they're there. And once the tubes go in, the guessing begins. And so that's just going to complicate a lot of things. So truly a gift for your family.
I think one thing, as nurses, we are very superstitious, right? We will not say the Q word under any circumstances.
Wait, what's the Q word? Are you allowed to say it right now?
No, ma'am.
You can say calm.
When things are calm, because, it's been a QUIET.
Yeah. Like,
things are quiet.
Don't say that.
That's a bad word. Right. You don't.
Wait, what? Why? There's something that I'm missing that I'm not understanding.
So shit's gonna hit the fan.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
ER or labor and delivery. Oh, it's been a really quiet night.
Oh no.
Of hell. Right.
Yeah.
So we are very superstitious, and so
got it.
When someone says, "Oh, don't talk about death," it's going to make it happen. Ma'am, I have talked incessantly about death and dying for years. I have not caused anyone's death. I promise. So we can be superstitious about a lot of things and be silly about some things, but that conversation is a gift. And I promise it will not make it happen. The world, no one has that kind of power. The universe doesn't work like that. When you see a correlation, it's not a causation. Did I get that direction right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always get that mixed up. So give that gift to if you really love people in your life, give that gift to them. Just do it. Just do it.
The last thing I suppose that I'll encourage people with is that you don't have to get it all figured out in one conversation. Like, just wade into it, and maybe the first conversation, all it looks like is, hey, I've been thinking about like some end of life stuff, and I want to make sure that I understand what you want. Could we, can we talk about that at some point, maybe in the next couple of weeks or next month? That's all the first conversation has to be. So you don't have to spend hours preparing and write a thesis or a dissertation on death and end of life stuff. You don't have to have this all dialed in for you to just have that first step towards having some of these conversations.
Yes, but then make the coffee date. Make the date to then actually follow through. Don't just, I should get to that someday, and then someday is 10 years later and you haven't.
Yeah, it's almost embarrassing to admit that as much as I talk about these things, I still have key people in my life that I really need to sit down with and have these conversations with. And even for myself, I need to decide some of these things and tell people what my wishes are. And that feels embarrassing to say because I'm such an advocate for having these conversations. But so all that to say, everyone listening, you're not alone. Even people who talk about this a lot still are not having some of these conversations yet, or, having them in less formal ways. So be encouraged that it's okay. It's going to be awkward. It might be kind of scary or sad, but you can do it. And it's really important.
Yes. But that's also why I have done all the things. I have a box right over there that has all my stuff in it, because amazing. I figured if I am preaching this, I need to live it. So
yeah.
Well, I think
maybe I'll just do
some people have a misnomer. My sister one time was because my mom's in her 80s, and my sister was like, well, I'm sure you've had these funeral, because we were talking about funeral stuff. And I go, no, I do before the casket. Funeral stuff is whatever. I mean, not that it's not important, because we've talked about how important it is, but our focus is getting people help before the casket, before they need these decisions to be made. And so it was just super funny. Her husband, who is a pastor, started laughing when he heard it. I'm like, no, we're before the casket. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. And I was like, yeah,
That's
like,
why our name of our company is that, because
it's
it's
before the
I love
it's
it.
also funny.
I love it.
so again, there's the humor that starts to come in, because people are like, ooh, but then like you remember it, right? So if it creates a
Mhm.
feeling, it's a hook, right? It creates that,
Yep.
but it really just says what we are. We're before the casket. What you
Yes.
guys do in your family and your funeral and stuff, there's professionals that do those kinds of plannings. We want to make sure those things happen that you want before that time.
Perfect. Well, I will, of course, link to everything in the episode notes so people know where to find you. I'll put all the books that we've talked about and websites and people also in the episode notes. And I want to acknowledge to people who are listening to this episode, good job for listening, because even just listening to something like this can be very difficult to face your own mortality and think about losing people that you love. So, very good job listening to this episode. And please take advantage of the resources that Amy and Erin have shared so graciously. And for all of my listeners, before we go, P.S.